Well, we're doing city, regions and energy, and first of all we started off with the implications of energy interventions in city regions. So first of all we start off by looking at kind of at a scalar question, i.e. what level and what type of intervention should there be, city and municipal authorities, and how city, regions, city authorities, municipal authorities fit in with national power structures. Again, that question of power keeps coming up for some very obvious reasons. How the energy transitions are going to be envisaged either within the city region itself or the city, and at what scale. This isn't discussed too much, and this was something that Simon brought up in the literature, but it's a very important question in terms of the political economy of what we're doing. Implication of this would be at what scale of project, what type of intervention are we talking about, who designs the plan, is it planned from the bottom upwards, is it done at multiple levels within that city region, is it a cooperation between national authorities and down to the municipal level. Because there are sound political economy implications and substantial problems of possibilities rather of conflict and opposing agendas one way or the other. So how do you, if you're going to do these interventions in these situations, work within or without, i.e. outside existing power structures, particularly looking at private-public boundaries, because you're not just talking about authorities, you're talking about businesses within cities, and as we all know in cities of the global south, the vast mass of businesses are small, informal businesses. So what part do they play? How do you integrate them into kind of city planning energy interventions, if that's the way you're going to do it? At the wider scale, as we talked about before, because the Millennium Development Goals have been missed off energy and they've been seen as a service and something that Halliburton does, all countries are subject to certain services agreements with international corporations in terms of the provision of energy. What conflict is there going to be between that scale, i.e. the multinational, transnational corporate scale, and any intervention you do at municipal or local levels within cities, and within city regions we call that Halliburton versus the community for some very obvious. So that was the implications of questions, which looks mainly at structures of power and the implications thereof of scalar understandings of energy interventions and the kind of theorization of those interventions versus the political reality of them, which I think we would all probably agree about. The next question is on livelihoods. We were particularly interested in the idea that energy source chains and energy use chains in lots of cities in the global south begin outside the city. They affect vast regions, which are not just the city regions or the cities themselves. Charcoal networks in Kenya might be one example of that, but those are all over Africa, and I can't remember who it was mentioned, charcoal. Was it yourself? Charcoal sales inside Maputo, and how will you design and implement your energy intervention at the same time as not disrupting or destroying existing economic livelihood networks or incorporating them into those energy interventions. So there's this kind of that scalar aspect that needs thinking about. Therefore, if you envisage these interventions at the municipal level, they have substantial implications for these extensive networks outside economic transport networks outside the city and the city region or the immediate region where you're talking about the intervention. At the macro scale, Andres, where were you? Yeah, said suddenly development needs to be rethought to incorporate the urban. So we went from sort of very small scale thinking about kind of impact on small local livelihoods, small scale businesses, informal businesses within the city and city region, up to the point where saying, well, basically there has been too much focus on the rural. Again, this is subject to some contention. Some of us agree with this and some of us didn't. But there needed to be a lot more on the urban, the development in the urban, because these low carbon transitions, which is sort of one of the things that we've been talking about, are going to take place as urban transitions overwhelmingly in a world that is, as Dan has pointed out, 50% urbanised. So from that, those two things, like how you build into the concept of energy interventions, understanding and taking care of existing livelihood structures whilst changing them and hopefully making them more efficient through energy interventions. How do you also bring in the context of sustainable, environmentally sustainable, sound livelihoods, because this transition will happen in the city. So it's not just a question of making people's lives better, it's not just a question of making their energy use more efficient, but also how you bring that in, as we all know from the energy trilemma, within the idea of carbon mitigation and transition to low carbon livelihoods. A big question. So moves on quite nicely, that one, to success. How do you measure whether a project's been successful and how you go about that? I chucked in decentralisation because we're doing a project on decentralisation. I needed to get that word in somewhere. And but I said we talked about, we had a discussion about whether that was a sufficient goal in itself, and it should never be. Decentralisation cannot be simply something by and of itself. It needs to be married to some goal such as kind of more locally controllable energy initiatives for people in, say, slum areas or important important because it is it can be an empowering intervention in and by itself. You own and control your own power system, or you have some control of your own solar home system, or wherever it is. You're not at the behest of a large power company. You're not paying a ton of money to people who come and cut you off if you don't, etc., etc. So there are aspects of decentralisation which I thought were very important as a metric of success itself. How you would measure those things, now that's another question in itself. So decentralisation shouldn't be seen as a thing by itself, but it can be seen as an empowerment metric, and it can be seen as the understanding of a tool for efficient low-carbon transitions would be just as far as we really wanted to take that, or I wanted to take it anyway. Reuse and use of urban waste products. A couple of other people have mentioned waste would be a good way of measuring metrics. As we say, lots of businesses, households in urban settings don't understand that waste has extraordinary potentials for producing energy in and of itself, and at the same time reduces pollution, reduces dirt in the city, and so on and so forth. So how well or badly an intervention can reuse waste and reinvent waste is another important metric which could be used. Guy came across the idea of replacing old with new technology, but we thought, well, perhaps old with innovative technology was a better thing, because there are existing technologies in the city where people already make use of waste products they recycle, that can be incorporated into energy chains and energy interventions. So yes, substitution of technology, inefficient carbon producing technologies for better ones would certainly be one way of looking at that. So there'd be a carbon mitigation pollution metrics, we felt, that could be used within those kinds of urban city region metrics. We got as far as who benefits. We only got just down to question number 4. There's always the possibility in city regions of the exclusion of the designated beneficiaries, particularly people who live in slum areas, who are not registered, who are unofficial, and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, that happens in too many projects. So we would have to take into consideration how you offset that, i.e. how you deliberately include communities of the marginalised, like our friends in Sao Paulo trying to do with the waste recyclers on the landfill sites in Sao Paulo. So there must be metrics to do with inclusion that you have to understand in that project to say the benefits. Exclusion of the unregistered is the other one. We also said that beneficiaries would therefore tend to be the people who are stable and registered, i.e. it would be the not so poor and the middle classes, such as they are, who would tend to perhaps be more the beneficiaries, because they're plugged into official systems. They can take advantage of registration and official conduits of infrastructure. So that's as far as we got.
Thank you, John. That was exhaustive.